He picked up the bowl and drank it in one gulp. His stomach felt like it was on fire again. Li Yi's face twisted. He pointed at her. His tears were almost choked by the big mouthful of strong alcohol. How much more ability do you have? Emmingzu looked at him. The light in her beautiful eyes was unfathomable. Li Xian had already fallen under the table. His eyes were closed and his mouth was still mumbling non-stop. Li Yi couldn't hear what Emmingzu was saying. His head was dizzy. If he didn't have enough alcohol tolerance, it was better not to touch the strong alcohol produced at home. He stood up and walked to his room unsteadily. The things in the room were almost moved out. There was a quilt left on the bed. It would be cold at night if he only covered himself with a quilt. At this time he couldn't care so much. He fell on the bed and slept. He didn't want to worry about the situation outside anymore. After a long time he was carried up from the bed in a daze. He smelled the familiar fragrance on Rui's body. He didn't want to open his eyes. He heard her whisper, "Husband, it's cold here. I'll sleep when I go home." Then his body became light. When he woke up the next day he saw that the bamboo pipe was connected to the outside through the window. He rubbed his head and sat on the bed in a daze. There was no such thing in Rui house. He remembered that after he fell on the bed yesterday, it was now when he woke up. When did he get home? After a while he thought of something. Rui had been there yesterday. So he was carried back by her? After figuring out the reason, Li Yi felt a little embarrassed. Shouldn't this kind of thing be done by men? It was the opposite in his home. The women in the family couldn't be too domineering. Otherwise, it would affect the harmony of the family. When he was thinking about this, Rui had already fetched hot water and walked in. Seeing him sitting on the bed, she said softly, "Husband, you're awake. Wash up first." Seeing her like this, Li Yi threw all his thoughts to the back of his mind. The word domineering should never be used to describe her. He was a little glad that Rui was his sister. If it were Rui, it would be difficult for him to live to the end of his life. He dipped the willow branch in salt to clean his teeth. He rinsed his mouth, soaped his hands and face, rubbed them for a while, rinsed them with water and dried them. He felt much more refreshed. Rui poured the dirty water outside. Xuanhuan used to do these things. Since Li Yi was injured last time, she did these things more frequently. When she walked to the door, she seemed to think of something and said, "By the way, Arrestor Li seems to be leaving. Husband, don't you want to go out and see?" When Li Yi walked out of the door, there were already a few carriages parked in front of the courtyard. A few armed men were tying up the goods on the carriages tightly. Shen Liang was also in the crowd. He was much more energetic than the first time they met. The clothes on him were probably worth only a few taels of silver. The woman called Yun Yang was holding his arm with a happy look on her face. If Emmingzu wanted to return to the capital, it was impossible for her to bring him along. This kind of person would be a pillar of the country if used well. If not, he would be a terrorist. No matter which possibility it was, he had to be firmly controlled by the country. Losing his freedom in exchange for a lot of things. It was hard to say whether it was good or bad. Everyone's choice was different. Looking at the smile on his face, he should be very satisfied with the current situation. A luxurious carriage was parked on the other side of the gate. A slender hand lifted the curtains of the carriage, revealing a face that made Li Yi slightly startled. Emmingzu had always been dressed unisex. She was wearing a constable's uniform, just like a man. Li Yi did not see her as a woman from the bottom of his heart. He had seen her in palace attire at the Ningguang residence. However, it was dark at night and he could not see clearly. This was the first time she appeared in front of him in the appearance of a woman. He had to admit that regardless of gender, the appearance of those with the surname Li was not bad. Li Xian, Emmingzu, and of course himself. "Why, do you also want to return to the capital with me?" Seeing that Li Yi kept staring at her, Mingzhu's face showed a rare blush as she looked at him and said, "Have a safe journey." Li Yi gave her his most heartfelt blessing and entered the door in a flash. Bang! The door was slammed shut and the latch was also locked from the inside. "Let's go." Emmingzu looked deeply at the closed door and said, "Go." The man on the carriage shook the reins. The carriage slowly started and drove into the distance. "Princess, are you really not going to bring that brat?" In the spacious carriage, the old woman looked at Emmingzu and asked in confusion. After a long time, she sighed and said, "Forget it." The old woman nodded and did not say anything else. The carriage returned to silence. Li Yi looked at the carriage disappearing from his sight through the gap in the door and also sighed. If she was not a princess, the two of them could actually become good friends. Unfortunately, there was no if. Chapter 256. By the time Li Yi opened the door, he could no longer see the group of people in the distance. He did not know if he would be able to see them again after today's parting. These days, etiquette was very strict. Girls from rich families would not easily show their faces in public. Li Yi did not believe that the royal family would allow a princess to be a constable for the rest of her life. Although she had said that she would return after the new year, Li Xian had told him that the possibility of that happening was almost negligible. She had returned to the capital this time because of the pressure from the capital. According to Li Xian, the officials in the imperial censorate were about to go crazy. She was a dignified princess, but instead of staying in the palace, she went to a place hundreds of miles away to become a constable. If it weren't for the fact that an imperial censor had accidentally discovered her, everyone would still be in the dark. In the past few days there were many memorials to the throne. Other than reprimanding the princess, there were other voices. A 17-year-old princess should have been married a few years ago. Even in the past few hundred years, there were not many princesses who got married at such a late age. As a member of the royal family, it was necessary to set an example for the people. If the princess was still unmarried at the age of 17, did she want all the women in the world to follow her example and stay at home as a leftover woman? If all the women married at such a late age, how could the country's population increase? How could the Jing kingdom become powerful? Since ancient times, the imperial censors were not afraid of causing trouble for others, especially for the royal family. With a few words, they could elevate a small matter to the height of politics. If it was not handled well, the etiquette would collapse and the country would not be far from being destroyed. It was obvious that Her Royal Highness was in trouble. Who knew if she would throw a few bombs at the censorate when she returned and send them all to heaven? She could even announce to the public that the heavens did not approve of their behavior and sent down divine punishment. This matter was not for Li Yi to worry about. Her Royal Highness was not someone who would suffer losses. He believed that she would be able to handle it herself. However, she did not bring up the matter of him going to the capital with her. This made Li Yi feel that the farewell banquet was not in vain. After standing at the door for a while, a relaxed expression returned to his face. He shook his head and walked into the courtyard. Everyone had their own lives. This was just an interlude. Life had to go on. He promised Xuanhuan that the next time it snowed, he would make a snowman that looked exactly like her. However, looking at the recent weather, the little servant girl might have to wait for a long time. Even if he couldn't make a snow sculpture, he could still draw a portrait. When she came out just now, he had asked her to wash up, put on her prettiest clothes and dress herself up carefully. He even asked her to put on the gold and jade hairpin that she was usually reluctant to wear in her hair. Hearing that she could also have such a painting, the young maidservant was overjoyed. She looked forward to it even more than the snowman. After all, the snowman would melt when the weather was clear, but the son-in-law's painting would be preserved forever. Although she really wanted a snowman that looked exactly like her, she would just have to beg the son-in-law the next time it snowed. Xuanhuan stood under a wintersweet tree in the courtyard. Li Yi picked up the brush and traced on the paper. Rui had just come out to see it. Li Yi felt that he could not favor one and discriminate against the other. After Xuanhuan got the painting, he asked her to call Rui out as well. Why did Mississippi Lu want it? Didn't she already have one? Why did she ask for it? The posture of holding the sword must be imposing, and it would be best if it could be painted with the feeling of a grandmaster. Who knew what a grandmaster looked like? Li Yi now felt more and more that second granduncle had the temperament of a real grandmaster. The more powerful a person was, the more ordinary he looked. For example, the divine monk sweeping the floor could fight two peerless master pros alone as if it was a game. Second granduncle, who was deaf and liked to take advantage of others, could also be a boss-like figure in the martial arts world. Of course, if he painted Mississippi Lu with the temperament of second granduncle, the price would be too high. He might not be able to bear the consequences of doing so. After finishing 3 paintings in a row, his wrist was a little sore. Mississippi Lu was still not satisfied and raised doubts about Li Yi's painting skills. He was too lazy to pay attention to her. It was just that he smashed the snow sculpture that looked more like her last time. Why was she still holding it in her heart and liked to find fault with him? Women were too vengeful. He should not provoke them as much as he could. The weather was good today. Lying on the rocking chair, sunbathing and thinking about things, Xuanhuan ran over and told him that the old storyteller in the brothel was looking for him. Why was old Sun looking for him? Could it be that he encountered some problems in the brothel that he could not solve? Recently, Li Yi had been preparing to discuss some things with him. He did not expect that he would come to him so soon. Old Sun did not come alone. A 15 or 16-year-old youth followed behind him. He was carrying a heavy bag on his shoulder. He was unfamiliar with the unfamiliar environment, so his expression was a little timid. Did the brothel encounter any difficulties? Looking at Old Sun's expression, it did not seem like something serious had happened. Li looked at him and asked. Speaking of the brothel, the old man's face broke into a smile. He said, "Young master, don't worry. The business in the brothel is very good. Yesterday there were 5 performances and every one of them was full. It seems that there will only be more people in the next few days." Without waiting for Li Yi to speak again, Old Sun turned around and waved to the youth. He said, "Hurry up and give it to me." The youth hurriedly put down the bag on his back. Old Sun put the coarse cloth bag in front of Li Yi. Li Yi heard a clattering sound, which meant that it was filled with copper coins. The old man said with a smile, "These are the rewards we received yesterday. There are also some silver and jade items that were all exchanged for copper coins. There are 5 strings of coins in total, and this is 3 strings of coins." 3 strings of coins was nothing to the current Li Yi, but this number still surprised him. It was 1,000 coins a day. It was not surprising that Rui Brothel could earn 10 times that amount in a day. After all, the people who went in and out of the shop were all rich people. However, a small brothel could earn 5 strings of coins in a day, and it was just relying on rewards. It looked like he had underestimated the popularity of stage plays in this world. There was still a lot of room for exploration in this industry. It should be known that in the future the entertainment industry would be a treasure trove of gold. If they could groom a few nationally known stars, they could do nothing but walk around and accept commercial performances, hold concerts, and so on. Wouldn't they earn a lot of money? His thinking seemed to be a little off. The status of actors here was low, and they couldn't be compared to the stars in the future. If he wanted to turn his dreams into reality, he first had to change the hierarchy of this world. Li Yi knew that he didn't have the ability to do that. Thinking about what Old Sun said, he realized another problem. He looked at him and said, "We agreed to split it 40-60. I'll take 40 and you take 60. It should be 2 strings of coins. Remember to take 1 from here when you go back. Don't make a mistake in the future." Old Sun shook his head. "No mistake. We thought about it and felt that 60% was too much. We don't feel at ease. We will split it like this in the future. Please don't reject it, young master." No one would complain about having too little money, and Old Sun was no exception. The reason why they agreed to split 60-40 was because they didn't know that this thing could be so profitable. They could earn 5 strings of coins in a day. If it was in the past, they wouldn't even be able to earn that much in a month. With a pile of copper coins in front of them, everyone felt at ease. However, if they were to take 60%, they would probably feel uneasy. Everyone knew how the money was earned. If they wanted to continue earning money in the future, they couldn't do without a good story. If they wanted to earn money at ease, they couldn't take the majority. There are people who think they have too much money and give it away. Li Yi looked at Old Sun with a surprised expression. Chapter 257. Old Sun put down the coins and left. As soon as Li Yi invited him in for a cup of tea, he was politely rejected. The 15 or 16-year-old young man followed behind the old man and didn't look back at the coins. Although 3 coins were a lot, they didn't belong to them. There were dozens of coins in his pocket. This was the only large sum of money he had ever held. When the female ghost appeared on the stage, he was responsible for releasing the smoke behind the scenes. This was his wages. When he went back later, he could buy a stick of candied hawthorn on the street. He didn't want to spend the rest of the money to marry a wife. He had wanted to eat candied hawthorn for a long time. He couldn't bear to buy a stick of 5 copper coins, so he bought a stick of 3 copper coins. He ate half of it today and kept the other half for tomorrow. His grandfather said that in a few days, if there was a suitable role, he could also show his face on the stage. His heart was nervous and looking forward to it. In the past, he was only an assistant and had never really stood on the stage to perform. After watching the old man and the young man walk out of the door after a long time, Li Yi remembered that he still had something to discuss with him. At this time, the old man was already gone, and the matter wasn't that urgent. They could talk about it next time. In the past, he didn't pay much attention to the brothel. It was just a place to kill time in his spare time. Now he didn't think so anymore. It was a treasure land that was neglected and no one cared about. The internet was still a very distant thing in this era. It would only appear in its embryonic form after hundreds or thousands of years. There were no platforms for ordinary people to discuss, such as Tieba or Weibo. To a large extent, the brothel played such a role. Recently, Li Yi also realized that it was a huge force. It was the source of public opinion and the intersection of all kinds of information. His soul was thousands of years ahead, so he knew how powerful this thing was. Wherever public opinion went, people could kill without leaving a trace. Even raising flags and changing dynasties couldn't avoid this place. It was just that most people didn't realize it yet. The destruction of the Han family was caused by Wu heir and a few storytellers. Rather than saying that Senior Han was killed by his concubine for the sake of his wealth, it would be more accurate to say that he was killed by the evil warding sword manual that didn't exist in the first place. If he had grasped this power in his hands earlier, he would have made his move before the bandits reached Qing and Prefecture. Then he wouldn't have ended up in such a sorry state. Originally, he was just doing it out of convenience within the scope of his ability to help these poor people living at the bottom of society, but he did not expect that it would also bring him a lot of profit. Of course, the most important role was the role that he had neglected in the beginning. For the time being, he had not considered revolting. It was something that he did in passing and did not require much investment. Who knew when it might come in handy? As for how to do it, he had to think about it carefully. After his afternoon nap was disturbed by Old Sun, he didn't feel sleepy at all. He was still lying on the rocking chair with his eyes closed. Without Little Boss by his side, his body and mind were relaxed. Li Yi felt that he was getting lazier. A dull sound of footsteps came from afar. Xuanhuan couldn't make such a sound even if she stamped her feet on the ground. Besides, she wouldn't come to disturb him when he was sunbathing. He didn't need to open his eyes to know that it was Fong. Fong seemed to be in a low mood recently. When asked, he wouldn't say what had happened. He suspected that he had a conflict with his wife at home, but it didn't seem like it. If they had a conflict, it was usually Fong who was whipped by his wife with a broom in her hand. After one night, it was as if nothing had happened. It was like this every time. He didn't know how they reconciled in private. This time was obviously different. Fong walked in front, and Fong's wife followed behind. Both of them didn't look very good. Seeing that the situation was not right, Li Yi immediately sat up from the rocking chair. The situation didn't seem very good. Looking at Fong's wife's expression, could it be that the matter between Fong and Miss Hong in Jade Courtyard was exposed and he was caught in the act? He had already warned him to do things cleanly, but this guy kept saying that he and Miss Hong were innocent. Now he had made a big mistake, hadn't he? Before Li Yi could ask, Fong's wife pointed at Fong and said with a livid face, "Fong III, do you still want to live like this?" Fong's face also darkened and he said, "You're a woman. What do you know? Go home." Fong's wife didn't give in at all. She said, "You have no conscience. We can't live like this anymore. Poor mother and daughter." It was over. It seemed that the matter had been exposed. Was Fong planning to elope with Miss Hong? Or was he going to welcome her back home? Li Yi immediately came to a conclusion in his heart. Fong's face was livid and he didn't speak. Li Yi glared at him, walked to Fong's wife and said, "Sister-in-law, don't worry. I'll make the decision for you. If he dares to bring Miss Hong home, I'll put him in prison and let him reflect for 10 days to half a month." Miss Hong? Fong's wife was stunned. She looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion, "What Miss Hong?" Fong's face was also livid. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and he began to be a little unsteady on his feet. Li Yi looked at the puzzled expression on Fong's wife's face. He looked back at Fong and found that he was winking at him. Li Yi's expression didn't change. He turned back and continued, "Sister-in-law, you don't know this. This Miss Hong is a performer in the brothel. Her singing skills are first class. Fong said that you like to listen to songs, so he must buy Miss Hong and let her sing for you every day. How much money do you think it will cost? How can ordinary people afford it? But don't blame him. After all, he is also kind. If you don't want to buy her, then don't. We're a family, so there's no need to hurt the harmony." Fong's wife's face softened a little, but she still glared at Fong and said, "We only have a few taels of silver at home and you're so arrogant. You want to buy a performer to sing for you. Is that something we can afford? We need another mouth to feed at home and there are no extra rooms. You're such a prodigal." Although it was a reprimand, her tone was much softer than before. Fong smiled embarrassedly, tacitly agreeing with what Li Yi had just said. Li Yi also wiped the sweat in his heart. Fortunately, he was quick-witted. Otherwise, he would have to go to Fong's grave every year on this day to burn a few incense sticks and remove the weeds. The misunderstanding was resolved. Fong's wife said that it was fine to go to the brothel to listen to the songs. After all, they were not a rich family and couldn't afford to keep performers. Fong took the initiative to admit his mistake. The couple lived in harmony. If it weren't for Li Yi standing in the middle and ruining their world, the atmosphere would have been even more perfect. Fong put a medium-sized bag in Li Yi's hand, looked at his wife and said, "We'll take the money that we should take. You can't touch a penny that we shouldn't take." I'll make the decision on this matter. You don't have to worry about it anymore. The woman's lips moved, but she finally nodded and didn't say anything. What is it? Li was puzzled by what he heard. Fang looked at him and explained, this is the share of the Rui Du and liquor. You can take it back, son-in-law. Although it's good to be able to earn money while lying in bed without doing anything, I don't feel at ease with this money. Li opened the bag and there was a dazzling white light inside. He was a little stunned. What was going on today? Why did everyone line up to give money? Chapter 258. Fang felt that money earned while lying on the bed was not peaceful. Li did not agree with this statement. Earning money while lying on the bed was also a kind of ability. With Fang's physique, he would definitely have a bright future in this industry. Although compared to the future, the overall atmosphere of today's society was more conservative, as long as he stood on the street holding a sign, he would definitely attract many lonely noble women who would send their maids to secretly give him an invitation. Finally, he knew why old Fang had been depressed for the past few days. He was purely idle. Do you know why this money is not peaceful for you? Li looked at him and asked. Fang looked up at Li with a confused expression. Have you ever seen second uncle sit under the tree outside and take a nap for the whole day? Li looked at him and asked. Fang nodded. These days he would occasionally sit under the tree and stare blankly. Second uncle would take a nap for the whole day and he would stare blankly for the whole day. However, why did the son-in-law ask him this? Have you ever seen Mrs. Su go out early in the morning and come back late at night carrying candied haws? Li continued to ask. Fang nodded again. Although Rui Lu's profits were greater, some women were bored at home and would go out every day to sell candied haws without a break. Have you ever seen the sun rise from the east roof and set from the west roof? Li finally asked. The expression on Fang's face was even more puzzled. He did not know why the son-in-law asked these things, but he still nodded mechanically. This is where your problem lies. Li threw the bag of money to him and said, why are you looking at things all day instead of working hard? Take the money back and call a few people over later. There's work and don't think about being idle in the future. Li realized that not everyone could be as carefree and at ease as he was. For people like old Fang, he had to find something for him to do in order to be at peace. The closer it was to the end of the year, the colder the weather became. He lit the stove in the room, but it was still so cold that he couldn't even stretch out his hand. He planned to make a Kong in the kitchen. Almost every house in the northern countryside had this thing. It was usually connected to the bottom of the stove. There was no need to deliberately add firewood to the fire. The heat generated from cooking every day was enough to keep the house warm for an entire day. If there was no warmth before going to bed at night, Grandma would bring a large pile of firewood, straw, or corn stalks from outside. Within a few minutes, her body would be warm. Because of this thing, when he lived in the countryside when he was young, he never had to worry about keeping warm in the winter. He would stay on the Kong for the whole winter eating and sleeping on it. This situation continued until he graduated from primary school. Ever since he went to middle school and moved from the countryside to the city, he never slept on the Kong again. It was winter and they had nothing to do. The whole family sat on the Kong and played cards to kill time. Fang soon came over with his men. There were more than a dozen families living in the stockade now. All of them stayed by his side in times of crisis. Li didn't treat them badly. He had already given them shares of Rui Du's profits. Recently he raised the shares of each family a little. These men had been very idle these days. After they moved out of the stockade they had nothing to do. The candied haws were a small business now. It was run by the family's in-laws and relatives. It was not appropriate for a man to get involved. Taking care of a child at home was not something a man should do. Fang only said that his son-in-law had something to do, and they all came over. It was just a Kong and 2 or 3 people were enough. With Fang and his men's labor they could make it today. The kitchen couldn't even accommodate more than a dozen people gathered together. Including Fang, there were 5 people left here. The others went back with a look of regret. Before they left, they even discussed with Fang and his men whether they could change, but Fang firmly refused. Son-in-law, tell me, what are you going to do this time? Fang rolled up his sleeves. At this time, even if Li asked him to climb a mountain of swords and plunge into a sea of fire to chop people on the street with a kitchen knife, he would probably do it. There was something to do, money was safe, and the knot in his heart was untied. Fang was revived on the spot. After knowing that the 6 men were busy in the kitchen, Fang's excitement was obviously reduced. He thought that they were going to do something big, but he found that the gap between his ideal and reality was too big. 2 of them went outside to buy bricks and stones, and the rest of them dismantled the original stove. The stove also needed to be changed. It was not easy to make a stove at this time. Xuanhuan was often choking in the kitchen and crying. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't light the fire. Because the ventilation was not good, when she lit the fire, she had to keep pulling the bellows next to her. It was very laborious. When Li was a child, the stove at home was also like this. His favorite thing to do was to go to the stove and help her add firewood and pull the bellows when his grandmother was cooking. Later, when the kitchen was rebuilt, it was changed to the new stove promoted by the state. Without the bellows, the ventilation was better, the ignition was faster, and it saved more materials. However, he couldn't find the feeling of giggling and pulling the bellows hard when he was a child. The Kong should be connected to the stove, which was basically the structure in the countryside at that time. When he was a child, he saw the craftsman build this thing, but when he recalled it now, of course it was impossible. After finding the drawings, Fong and the others violently dismantled the stove. After cleaning out the garbage, he had already drawn the drawings, including the specific size of each structure. This thing looked simple, but the size couldn't be wrong. If it was a little higher or a little shorter, there would be problems. "Young master, what is this thing?" Fong took the drawings back and forth, but he couldn't see anything. He scratched his head and looked at Li and asked, "As long as you put this thing in your kitchen, Zhuzi won't complain about being cold at night?" Li said simply and straightforwardly if he explained too much to Fong. "Okay, I'll do it tomorrow." Fong never doubted Li's words. He heard from his young master that this thing was as warm as summer when he lay on it. At night, he could hug his wife and baby and sleep on this Kong, which was quite beautiful. "Old Su, it's a deal. Tomorrow I'll also get this thing for my house. Remember to come and help. If your house also wants to do it, call me." He patted the shoulder of a man next to him and said. When he was dismantling the stove, he wiped the black ash on his hands. Immediately, a big palm print appeared on Old Su's outer shirt. Fong's butt was kicked. The man scolded, "Son of a bitch, this was just washed by my wife. It's not easy to dry clothes in cold weather. When I go back, she will scold me again." Fong patted his butt and was not angry. He laughed and said, "Your wife is spoiled. If she dares to scold me, she will slap her." Old Su laughed and said, "I don't know who was beaten by his wife with a broom in the yard yesterday. By the way, who is Miss Hong? Why have I never heard you mention her? When did you hook up with her?" Fong's face suddenly turned red as if it was about to drip blood. In Old Su's proud eyes, he kicked him. "Fong Laos, and how dare you hit me? If you say one more word about Miss Hong, I will beat you again." "Okay, I can't beat you. I'll go and ask your wife what is going on with Miss Hong." Old Su sneered and strode outside. Fong was stunned for a moment. His face changed greatly and he immediately chased after him. His voice came from afar. "Old Su, brother Su, don't. Let's talk about it," Xuanhuan mumbled as she walked in from outside. She blinked her big eyes at Li and asked, "Young master, who is Miss Xuanhuan?" Before Li could answer, she could only find a familiar figure in her kitchen. It was still fine in the morning. She said in a panic, "How did our kitchen become like this?" Chapter 259. After explaining to the little maid for a long time, she finally believed that her kitchen did not attract evil thieves. Unable to find the money, she tore down the stove to vent her anger. Thinking about it, which stupid thief would look for valuable things in the kitchen? Her private money was all locked in a small box, and even the valuable jewelry bought by the son-in-law was all locked in it, hidden under the small bed in the room. She carried the key with her every day so it would not be lost. What was more, first miss and second miss were at home and no thief could come in. She was afraid that if she just sneaked into the house, before she had time to take a breath, Uncle Fong would break her legs and send her to the yamen. The treasure box was under the bed so it was very safe. But without the stove, where should she cook today? She would not worry about this later because the son-in-law said that after the new stove was built, it would not be so difficult to light a fire, and it would not always give out smoke, which made her run out several times to cook. It was said that it could also save firewood. Behind the stove there was a big bed which could sleep 4 people. The big bed was connected to the stove so it was warm at any time every day. When there was nothing to do during the day they could sit on it to keep warm. Xuanhuan imagined the scene of the whole family sleeping on the big bed, and her little face immediately turned red. Ignoring the blushing Xuanhuan who was lost in her thoughts, the little girl just liked to let her imagination run wild. Lao Feng and Lao Su had their arms around each other's shoulders and were playing with the mud outside. They did not look like they were at each other's throats just now. Seeing the flattering expression on his face, Li knew that Feng was finished. His weakness was caught, and his status among the brothers would definitely plummet in the future. There might really be a Miss Hong in the Jade Courtyard, and it seemed that she had known Fong for a long time even before she knew him. In the past, his family was so poor that they could not eat, so it was impossible for them to know each other through prostitution. But every time he mentioned Miss Hong, Fong would blush and stammer. The relationship between them was definitely not as simple as a pure man and a woman. In any case, this was Fong's family business. Although Li Yi was full of curiosity, he did not say it, and he would not break the casserole to ask. Walking out of the yard, they did not go far before they heard the sound of reading from a small yard next to them. It was Qing teaching the children. A yard in the house was specially made as a school. Originally there were 2 rooms. After removing the middle wall, there was a big classroom, and the small yard outside was the playground. Although there were not many students to begin with, there were only about 20 girls, and it was enough to occupy 1 room. Mr. Qin, who had broken his leg and could only lie on the bed, said that it would be better for the school to be brighter and more comfortable for the children to sit in. Lao Fong and the others did not hesitate to tear down the wall in the middle. As early as in Willow Leaf Village, Mr. Qin was the teacher of the school. Of course, at that time, only children with the surname Liu were qualified to go to school. During the days when Li Yi was the teacher, under the attraction of Sun Wukong, the number of children from poor families gradually increased. Now the position of teacher was handed over to Qin. It could be seen that she was very diligent and was born to be a teacher. There were more than 20 children in the big house. As long as they were of the right age, she went to visit their homes and let them go to school. This was a good thing. Children were very naughty. In the past, they ran wild in the village, went into the river to catch crabs, climbed trees to dig out bird nests, and never made people feel at ease. Now that they moved here, they did not have to do these things anymore. The prefectural city was full of crooks and honest people. If they did not let them go out to play, the house would be turned upside down. No parent did not have a headache. Little Qin could help them look after their children, so there was no parent who wouldn't be willing. If the naughty child was playful and didn't want to go to school, they would slap him on the butt and ask if he wanted to go. If he didn't want to go, they would slap him again. After a few more slaps, he would be willing. At first, she thought she was looking for someone to look after the child, but a few days later, when the woman was playing with the money, the naughty child proudly pointed at a pile of copper coins and said that she had lost wrongly. 7 copper coins plus 8 copper coins should be 15 copper coins, not 14. The woman was stunned for a moment and gave the naughty child a good beating. 7 plus 8 was 14. She had remembered it clearly since she was young, so how could it be wrong? Counting his fingers and toes again, he realized that he had counted incorrectly. Surprised, she asked the naughty child when he learned to count. The naughty child teared up and said that it was Mr. Qin who taught him. The woman gave the naughty child a few copper coins and told him to buy some good food. Carrying the gift, she went to Qin's house. They had to thank little Qin. Both she and the child's father were boorish people and didn't know a single word. The pile of copper coins at home could only be counted for fun. If they were asked for specific numbers, they would be dumbfounded. But now their child had only been in school for a few days and already knew how to count. If he knew a few more words, not only would he not have to take the county examination, even if his family met with a disaster in the future, he wouldn't have to starve to death. There had never been a case of a cultured person starving to death. Generations of people couldn't even read a few words. Their great-grandfather generation only knew how to use a saber to kill. Who would have thought that a cultured person would actually appear here? Their ancestral tombs were really emitting green smoke. The families who had sent their children to school all ran to Qin's house. They were not stingy at all with rice and meat. How could they not bring some gifts? Fong carried a stove and went in. The chimney was made of hollow bamboo and tied tightly together. From then on, this new type of stove had successfully been installed in all the families in the house. The honeycomb briquette was also ready. Uncle Han made a mold and pulled over a few carts of coal powder. Soon, the briquettes with holes on them were piled in front of each family's house. When Li Yi walked into Uncle Han's house, the old man was sitting in the yard, busy. It seemed that he was old and couldn't stay idle. Every time he came to Uncle Han's house, he had work to do. Only second uncle was different. Other than sunbathing and eating, there seemed to be nothing else that could interest him. "Young master, what are you making this time?" Hearing footsteps coming from the yard, Uncle Han raised his head and asked with a smile. He had spent his whole life as a carpenter, but he could only make wooden knives and wooden spears for naughty children. He felt a little regretful. He could only make the best use of his skills in Uncle Han's house. Since he had nothing to do, Uncle Han liked to make those strange things that Uncle Han asked him to make. However, Uncle Han was too polite. He gave money every time and often asked Xuanhuan to send rice and noodles over. The old man was the only one in the house. The silver biscuits hidden under the water tank in the kitchen could not be used up in this lifetime. Li was actually embarrassed to trouble Uncle Han every time. However, Uncle Han was the only one around who had this skill. Besides, it was not easy for him to live alone. He definitely wouldn't want to give money to the old man for no reason. He could only find something for him to do from time to time. When he gave money, he had to have a legitimate reason. Looking at the old man, he smiled and said, "Just some small things." As he said that, he took out the drawing in his arms. Looking at the small squares on it, Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, you don't have to worry about it. I can make it in 2 days at most. It's not difficult to make these small squares. It's just that my eyes are not good now. I'm afraid that you have to find a young man with good eyesight to carve the words on it. Uncle Han, you just need to get these small squares out. I'll find someone else to carve the words," Li said with a smile. Ever since he saw that Li could use a sword to carve words on the wall that were the size of a fingernail, and her speed was so fast that Li couldn't even see it clearly with his eyes, Li felt that the job of carving on mahjong would belong to her. This morning you wanted to buy a performer, and now you want to go to Drunken Fragrance restaurant for a meal. You'll have to spend a few taels to eat there. Why don't you take a look at the kind of people who eat there? Sooner or later the family's savings will be used up by you, Fong retorted again. When Li Yi walked to the door of the house, he saw a broom flying out from the yard of Fong's house. Sure enough, you can't judge a book by its cover. One was an iron man who wouldn't frown even if a knife cut his body, and the other was a seemingly virtuous and dignified peasant woman. Suddenly, the dignified and virtuous woman turned into a female tyrannosaurus, and the indomitable man turned into a good-for-nothing. What a sin. Once again he sighed at his luck. Although when they first met, Rui smashed the solid wooden table in front of him, and he didn't know how much fiercer she was than Mrs. Fong, but for the rest of the time she was a good housekeeper, a gentle and virtuous ideal wife. Although there was still a veil between them, it was still better than. Thinking of Fong's wailing under the broom, he quickly threw that possibility out of his mind. It was still early and there was just a touch of white in the east. There were always reasons to get up late in winter. Most people were still sleeping in their warm beds and were unwilling to get up. There were not many people in the tiled houses. Who would come here to watch a show in the early morning? The open brothels were empty, and the doors of the wine shops and tea houses were closed. Only a figure occasionally walked out of the brothels. His footsteps were weak, and he was still thinking about how good the girl's kung fu was last night. In one of the brothels, Sun Yun, who had just turned 15, got up very early. He put the rag in the warm water and quickly wiped the tables and chairs. He needed to wipe the tables and chairs clean before the brothels opened. There couldn't be any dirt on them. Then he boiled the hot water so that he could prepare tea for the customers at any time. He was only wrapped in a thin jacket, but his forehead was covered with fine sweat. The young man's body was not afraid of the cold. After working for an hour, he only felt that his body was steaming hot, and he didn't feel cold at all. He didn't do this work for free. Sister Ruoqing said that if he could get up so early every day and finish wiping the tables and boiling the hot water, she would give him 10 copper coins. She would pay him once a day. Thinking about the dozens of copper coins lying in the small money bag that he secretly hid, he thought that one day he would be able to save enough money to marry a wife. He wouldn't need his old grandfather to worry about him anymore. His heart was full of energy and the frequency of his hands also increased. He didn't even notice that his grandfather had walked behind him. Old Sun walked over and looked at him lovingly. He said, "Xiao Yun, rest for a while. There are still 2 hours before the brothels open." Sun Yun turned his head and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He grinned, revealing his white teeth. He said, "Grandpa, I'm not tired. I'm almost done. I still have to boil the water later." Then he continued with the work at hand. There were only 2 sets of tables and chairs to be wiped. He could rest for a while when he boiled the water later. Looking at the child's quick movements, Old Sun's old face showed a gratified expression. A diligent child wouldn't starve to death. Even if he were to lie in a coffin one day, Xiao Yun could live on alone. Of course, before he found a wife for his child and settled his marriage, he wouldn't be willing to close his eyes. If he could live to the day he held a great-grandson, he would die with a smile on his face. Looking at the empty brothel, Old Sun's face showed a trace of a smile. It didn't matter that there was no one now. He knew that it wouldn't be long before this place would be full of customers. The painted skin could still be performed for a period of time. When the number of customers gradually decreased, the number of performances of the painted skin would be reduced, and Ying Ning, and a Chinese ghost story could officially appear on the stage. With Li around, there would be no shortage of such good stories, and of course the customers' tips would not be less. As a wandering actor, when did the future become so worth looking forward to? When a person was immersed in beautiful things for too long, he couldn't help but think of some sad things. Yesterday, a brothel outside the city collapsed, and an old friend of many years was crushed under it. Although he wasn't seriously injured, his old bones were probably lying in bed for at least 10 days to half a month before he could get out of bed. He could be considered to have made a name for himself, but there were still countless actors who found it very difficult to live. In the past 2 days, countless old friends had come to him, hoping to make a living here. However, the number of people here was indeed saturated, so Old Sun could only helplessly shake his head and refuse. He had been wandering around for a lifetime, so he could understand the situation of most actors the best. If there was anything he could help them with, he would not hesitate to help. However, he was small and weak. In the big environment, he couldn't change anything at all. Early in the morning, there was not a single customer in the brothel. Only Old Sun was sitting in the corner in a daze. Li walked over. Old Sun heard the footsteps, raised his head, and hurriedly stood up. Li waved his hand and motioned him to sit down. He asked with a smile, "How was business yesterday?" Old Sun smiled and said, "Very good. The reward I received is a little more than the day before yesterday. I haven't had time to send it to you." Yesterday was the second day of the painted skin stage play. Not only did the popularity not decrease, but it also rose. Old Sun had clearly felt that the space in the brothel was not enough. "Don't be so anxious. The money will be with you for now. You can pay me once every half a month or once a month." Li didn't come here early in the morning to ask for money. After a few greetings, he went straight to the point and said, "There is something I want to discuss with Old Sunday. Just call me Old Sunday." "What's the matter?" "Just tell me," Old Sun said hurriedly. "It's like this. You should have seen that this brothel can't accommodate many customers, so the profit is naturally not much. I want to recruit more actors and build such a brothel in and outside the city. I want to sign a contract with them. I can provide them with stories and scripts. As for how to distribute the profit, you can distribute it according to the proportion like we do, or you can give them a fixed monthly salary." Li looked at Old Sun and said. This wasn't an idea that came to him in the past 2 days. When Li saw the strange culture of the brothel for the first time, he had this idea. What he didn't lack were good stories and scripts. The library contained the essence of thousands of years of culture in wuxia. It was almost inexhaustible, and he couldn't use it all in his life. After seeing the celebrities who made money so much that their hands cramped, and then looking back at their miserable predecessors, he always felt strange in his heart. Li was very interested in making a small change in this industry. In addition to this reason, he was also happy to see the poor people at the bottom of society live a better life. Many people were intoxicated by their graceful dance and long sleeves. They were the creators of art, but when people appreciated art, they imposed a lot of suffering and humiliation on the creators of art. This was unfair. Of course, there were some reasons that were not known to outsiders. When the entertainment industry in this world began to flourish, the lowly actors became the idols in people's hearts. A name written casually could be sold at a sky-high price. Wherever they went, they could hear the cheers of fans. People knew which actor's dance was the best in the world, and their singing was unparalleled. They didn't know who the emperor of the country was. This kind of scene always brought back some memories in the depths of his heart. Living in this world, both material and spiritual enjoyment were indispensable. When people were no longer hungry, they would pursue a higher level of spiritual pleasure. This could be seen from the painted skin stage play, which was always sold out. This was a huge cake, a cake that had not been noticed by people yet. He had to seize the opportunity before others discovered it. Of course, after recognizing the particularity of the brothel, Li didn't intend to give up the opportunity to control the invisible power in his hands. This world was too unsafe. If he didn't have enough power in his hands, he could be crushed like an ant at any time. In the past few months, the peaceful life in Willow Leaf Village was gone forever. There had been earth-shaking changes. He always felt a little guilty if he still lived as carelessly as before. "Child, what did you just say?" The old man thought that he had heard it wrong, and even his voice was a little trembling. Before Li spoke, he asked again, "Are you willing to accept those poor people who wander around and give them food?" The old man's voice was still a little trembling, for fear that he had misunderstood. Whether those wandering performers could fill their stomachs depended entirely on luck. If they met a generous customer, they wouldn't have to starve for a long time. If the customer only watched the performance and didn't give money, they would have to tighten their belts for the next few days. When did people from Lu Qi get a fixed salary? Li Yi was a little puzzled as to why the old man had suddenly become so agitated. Since the stage play Painted Skin had such good ratings when Journey to the West and Legend of the White Snake came out, who knew how shocked these country bumpkins who had never seen the world would be? This was a business that would not lose money at all. It was too ridiculous to rely on other people's money to eat. Some people didn't even need to pay a penny to watch a performance. After watching, they left. No one thought that this method was unreasonable. Each person had one ticket and they could sit according to the number. It was so simple and convenient. If he wanted to completely change this industry, he couldn't do it overnight. He temporarily suppressed these thoughts and looked at the old man who was staring at him with excited eyes. He said, "What do you think about giving them 500 cents a month?" "That's too much, too much." Old man's son was so excited that his beard trembled. In this industry, it was already a blessing from the heavens to be able to eat their fill. Most people didn't even dare to dream of receiving 500 cents a month. If they didn't do this kind of good thing, they would be kicked in the head by a donkey. You can discuss this with Miss Wan first. You can first call some people to try it out. It's not certain whether it will succeed or not. Remember to choose people who know everything. For now, don't send money over. You guys use my share first. If it's not enough, then we'll talk about it. Old man's son patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, young master. Leave this matter to me. I will definitely do it properly for you." Old man's son's face turned red. This was a good thing for the many performers in Qing and Prefecture. He invited him into the Rui workshop and poured him a cup of green tea. After taking a sip, Dr. Qin sighed and said with a bitter tone, "County Lieutenant, you really made me look for you for a long time." "Why is Dr. Qin looking for me?" Li Yi looked at him in confusion. Did I owe him money? Looking at him, it seemed that he owed him a lot. Impossible. I don't remember when I borrowed money from him. Looking at the county lieutenant's confused face, the expression on Dr. Chen's face could no longer be described in words. Since the last time he saw the county lieutenant suture the wound with a needle and thread, Dr. Chen knew that this was another great achievement. He solemnly asked him to spread this method. At that time, the county lieutenant also readily agreed, but after that day there was no news. Although he personally saw the county lieutenant's rescue that day, he went to see the patient. The suture was obviously not an ordinary thread, and there seemed to be some details before the suture. He still had a lot of doubts in these aspects. It was a matter of great importance, so it was impossible for him to hastily present this method. As a doctor, Dr. Chin certainly knew the importance of this method. If all the doctors in the world could learn this method, many lives would be saved. In the days when he was waiting for the county lieutenant to teach this method, he didn't know the taste of food and couldn't sleep at night. If he could also leave a small mark on this great merit, what kind of honor would it be? However, after waiting for a few days, he didn't see the county lieutenant again. Dr. Chen couldn't sit still and went to the county government office to look for him several times, but he only got the answer that the county lieutenant was not in. He went to the Rui workshop to look for him, but the door of the shop was closed and there was a big lock hanging outside. He stayed outside for several days but no one came. One night he finally saw the light in the shop, but before he got close he was put on the neck by several knives at the same time. He was almost scared to death in the middle of the night. If he didn't explain his identity to those people, his head would have been cut off. Thinking of his experience these days, and then looking at the county lieutenant's confused expression at this time, it was obvious that he had forgotten about that matter. Dr. Chin almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Forcibly suppressing his old blood pressure, Dr. Chin stood up and respectfully bowed to Li Yi, saying, "I beg you, Your Excellency, to spread the method of suturing wounds to the world. Countless people and soldiers will remember the county lieutenant's great kindness." After Dr. Chin spoke, Li Yi remembered this matter. At that time he seemed to have said that he would teach him the method of suturing wounds, but he didn't. At that time he was worried about those gangsters, so he didn't remember it later. If he hadn't suddenly mentioned it today, he probably wouldn't have remembered it for the rest of his life. They didn't need to remember his great kindness. Saving a life was better than building a 7-storied pagoda. Suturing wounds didn't require any technical content, but it could play a big role on the battlefield. If the doctors in the army could learn it, at least more than 20% of the soldiers could escape from the line of death. Gunpowder was like a devil locked in Pandora's box, a machine that harvested human lives in the cold weapon era. Li Yi was the person who released it. No one knew how many people would die in the hands of this devil in the future. Although he didn't do it himself, it could be regarded as an indirect sin. He didn't want to build an innumerable pagoda to become a Buddha, but it was good to reduce some of his sins. In order to ensure that he didn't miss any key information, Dr. Chen made full use of the truth that a good memory was inferior to a bad pen. He deliberately borrowed a pen and paper from Li Yi and wrote down all the words that Li Yi said next. After that, he also asked Li Yi to check it several times until there was no mistake. Looking at the dense page of paper, Dr. Chen finally showed a smile on his face. This piece of paper was as light as a feather, but it weighed more than 10,000 pounds in his heart. If the future generations could remember his name when they mentioned the suturing technique again, besides feeling grateful to County Magistrate Li, he wouldn't have any regrets even if he died now. County Magistrate I Chen Mufeng, dare not forget your kindness in this life. Dr. Chen's face was solemn, and he once again bowed respectfully to Li Yi. The bow just now was for the people in the world, and this bow was for himself. In this world, everyone wanted to have a chance to leave their name in history and be remembered by the future generations. Dr. Chen was naturally no exception. County Magistrate Li, who gave him this opportunity, could accept his big bow. County Magistrate, if your relatives and friends need medicine for any diseases in the future, you can come to our Huichen Hall. We won't charge a penny for the medicine. In order to show his sincerity, Dr. Chen patted his chest and said. Li looked at him. Compared with Her Royal Highness, who only exploited him and never gave him any benefits, Dr. Chen's sincerity was already very good. But why did he still have an urge to kick him? Chapter 262. Dr. Chen held the piece of paper and left as if he had found a treasure. Before he left, he told Li Yi that when he got back, he had to make a copy of what was written on it and personally hand it over to Sir Lu of the Imperial Physician's Bureau. As for the original manuscript, which was this piece of paper, he had to keep it at home and pray to it every day so that it could be passed down to future generations. It seemed that for the ancient people, money was not the most important thing. Even when they did not have enough to eat, clothes to wear, and food to eat, they still valued reputation and honor more than anything else. Scholars sharpened their brains to enter the court and become an official. Which one of them did not have ambitions to fulfill, to make a career, and to leave their name in the annals of history? Perhaps later on, they only thought about making money and wielding power, but that was a trend in a bad situation. One could not deny their original intentions. Dr. Chen put down his pride and asked him for advice on suturing wounds. He even traveled thousands of miles from Qing and Prefecture to the capital to personally hand this thing over to the hands of the imperial physician, Lu Jimin, so that all the doctors in the world could learn it. All this was just to leave a small mark in the annals of history. If someone in the future, when suturing a wound, had a 1 in a million chance of thinking of the name Chen Mufeng, he would probably laugh out loud in his coffin. His obsession was so deep that if Li Yi had said no at that time, Dr. Chen would probably have knocked his head on Li Yi's body to prove his sincerity. As he walked out of Rui's workshop, he sighed. Leaving a name in the annals of history was far more practical than a few hundred or 1,000 taels of silver. In the future, if he had a cold or diarrhea, he would not go to other medicine shops, but to Huichen Hall. Whatever he could get back was better. Li Yi held a sword in his hand and waved it in the courtyard. Every day he would take out 2 hours to practice martial arts in the courtyard. This had become his daily routine. The sword in his hand was Lu Rui's treasure. After much coaxing and pestering, he finally managed to borrow it from her. He also used 10 pieces of osmanthus cakes as a condition for her to teach him a set of swordsmanship. The osmanthus cake was given to him by Wan Ruoqing. He liked doing business without any cost the most. In 2 days he had almost mastered the basic sword art taught by Lu Rui. When he was fighting with Mississippi Lu, who only used a branch and did not use any true chi, his sword was knocked away after only 2 moves, and the branch was on his neck. The evaluation he received was that he only knew inflexible moves and did not know how to be flexible. Even if he learned a powerful sword art, it would be useless. Li Yi was also helpless about this. He didn't have much experience in fighting, and only Mississippi Lu was willing to spar with him. How much flexibility could he possibly have? He also knew where his shortcomings were. When it came to practicing martial arts, not everyone could dominate the world after learning a powerful martial art. Without enough accumulation of experience, it was like owning a treasure for nothing. The only thing missing was the key to open the door. It would be a waste not to use the free sparring partner. If he fought with Mississippi Lu more, he would become more and more powerful. Uncle Han walked over with a cloth bag in his hand and put it on the stone table. There was a rustling sound coming from the cloth bag. Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, the small wooden blocks are all done." "Thank you for your hard work, Uncle Han." Li Yi opened the cloth bag and saw piles of small wooden blocks inside. They already had the shape of mahjong, and the size was similar to the size of the mahjong in the future. The edges and corners were also polished very smooth so it would not hurt his hand. He counted the number and there were exactly 150 pieces. There were 136 pieces in a set of mahjong. In case one piece was broken there was a spare. Now that he had the wooden blocks, he would leave the rest to Mississippi Lu. Looking at Lu Rui who was practicing swordsmanship not far away, Li Yi carried the cloth bag and walked over. She was practicing the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Recently she seemed to have hit a bottleneck. She often raised her sword and slashed randomly. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi did not dare to talk to her. Rui, how about we discuss something? Seeing Li Yi walking over, Lu Rui put away the sword in his hand. He glanced at her and said impatiently, "What?" Her tone was a little irritated. These days her learning of the Tai Chi swordsmanship was smooth. 2 days ago she finally hit a bottleneck. Her progress was slow as if she was stuck in a quagmire. "Help me carve something on these wooden blocks, and I will teach you the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship." Li Yi looked at her and said temptingly. Negotiation was also an art. First of all, one had to know what the other party needed. Then, they would be able to achieve miraculous results. Because of this matter, Mississippi Lu was like having her period for the second time in a month. Her temper was bad and even xuanhuan was avoiding her. She could not resist the temptation and could only be a free labor in exchange for what she needed. "You know the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship?" Anger flashed across Lu Rui's face. She glared at him. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Because she had hit a bottleneck, she was thinking about how to break through even when she was eating and sleeping. Suddenly, someone told her that she knew the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Her first thought was not happiness but anger. This was Mississippi Lu's logic. Seeing that Mississippi Lu's gaze was starting to turn hostile, Li Yi was a little puzzled. The story should not have developed like this. Shouldn't she agree to his request and carve mahjong in exchange for the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that he talked nonsense about? Why was she looking at him like that? Wait, why did she raise her sword? What do you want? Wait, let's talk. Put down your sword first. Don't do it. Help. After a while, Li Yi was forced to a corner by Lu Rui. Mississippi Lu probably did not know that her current position was called leaning against the wall in the future. She only looked at Li Yi with a mocking gaze. Li Yi felt that he was too naive just now. Women were unreasonable creatures. If this woman was called Lu Rui, then she could not be judged by common sense. The idea of using the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that even he did not know whether it was real or fake had been proven to be impossible. Looking at Mississippi Lu's expression, she was ready to force herself on him. There was no rice at home, so Rui took Xuanhuan out to buy some. Uncle Han closed the door when he went out. There were only the two of them at home. Even if they screamed their throats out, no one would come to save them. For Taiji, the sword moves aren't important. Only by memorizing the constantly revolving sword intent and forgetting the order of the moves can one obtain its essence. When facing an enemy, one must control the sword with his will, allowing it to be ever-changing and have endless moves. Only by mastering it thoroughly can one be able to use it as one pleases. A man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. Facing Mississippi Lu's robbing behavior, Li Yi decided to compromise for now. Although he did not really understand what this sentence meant, when Zhang Sanfeng taught Zhang Wuji swordsmanship on Wudong Mountain, he made him forget the moves. Perhaps this was what it meant. It should be able to scare Mississippi Lu, right? After interacting with Rui for so long, Li Yi already knew that the more mysterious something was, the more it could scare her. As for whether or not she could learn anything from it, it would depend on her own comprehension. Sure enough, after hearing this sentence, Mississippi Lu finally let go of him. A familiar blank expression appeared on her pretty face. Li Yi let out a sigh of relief. When it came to tricking people, ordinary people could not be compared to those Taoist priests and monks. Priest Zhang was really a god and he could not catch up to him. Chapter 263. Just when Li Yi gave up on the idea of hiring Mississippi Lu for free and planned to do it himself, Lu Rui walked over with her sword in her arms. "Tell me, what did you want from me?" She looked at Li Yi with her sword in her arms. The feeling of a storm just now disappeared without a trace, and she felt a sense of lightness. "Nothing much. I just want you to help me carve something on this." Li Yi pointed at the pile of small wooden blocks and said. A moment later, the long sword in Rui's hand was replaced by a sharp little dagger. Her movements were so fast that Li Yi couldn't see it clearly. Rings or long strips quickly appeared on the small blocks. After they were carved, she threw them to Li. Li couldn't believe it. Mississippi Lu had changed so much before and after. Did her period leave for the second time this month in such a short time? Or did she really understand the essence of Tai Chi sword from those words and successfully break through the realm? After careful observation, he found that there seemed to be some small changes in her body. In the past, she was like a sharp sword that could scare people to death with just a glance. Now, that kind of temperament had weakened a lot, and there was an additional indescribable feeling. This feeling was more or less similar to the feeling that Rui gave him. Li sighed in his heart, feeling quite hurt. What kind of person was this? He just randomly made a few sentences, and she actually understood the essence of martial arts. Wasn't what she said just now nonsense in wuxia novels? Could it be that old Master Jin, the master of wuxia novels, was actually a peerless master who returned to the natural state? He probably wouldn't have the chance to verify the truth of this matter in this lifetime. He picked up the small wooden block that Lu Rui threw over and painted the patterns on it. The ink quickly seeped in and he put it under the sun to dry it in a short while. Winter really wasn't a good season. It was annoying to always be under the sun. Occasionally he could sit on the Kong and play mahjong to change his mood. There were 4 people in the house, just enough for a table. In a few days he would also make the poker cards. When Rui and Xuanhuan cooked, the 3 of them could also play dodiju. Thinking about it, it wasn't a bad idea. Old son, you're such a busy man. How come you have time to visit me today? In a dilapidated thatched cottage outside the prefecture city, an old man who was lying on a bed looked at the old man's surnamed son as he walked in and said with a smile. I came to see if you're dead or not, old son said without hesitation. Don't worry. I have to see if you're dead before I can close my eyes. They were old friends who often joked about such things. The old man lying on the bed with a somewhat dispirited complexion did not get angry. Instead, he retorted sarcastically. Old man's son placed a pile of things in a corner. Immediately, a young man came over with a porcelain bowl and respectfully said, Grandpa son, drink some water. You've accepted a good disciple. Old man's son rubbed the young man's head and said with a smile. Knowing that his master and grandpa's son had something to say, the young man put down the bowl and left. Speaking of the young man in front of him, the old man lying on the bed relaxed his eyebrows. The old man on the bed looked at old man's son and said, Let's get straight to the point. I don't have many years left to live. I heard that your farm has a steady stream of customers these days, and you've turned a dead farm into a farm. I admire your ability and I've never asked you for anything in my life. I just hope that after I die you can give this child something to eat. The child is still young and he can't live alone. As long as he doesn't starve to death, you can do whatever you want with him. No, that won't do. Old son shook his head before he finished listening. A trace of anger appeared on the old man's face and he said, Old son, this child's talent is not bad. If you train him for a few years, he will be able to earn money for you. We've known each other for a lifetime, and you're not even willing to help me with this? Old son shook his head and said, Don't be in such a hurry to die. You should teach your disciple yourself. When I came here, I already sent little Yun to find a doctor. When the time comes, I'll ask the doctor to write a prescription and have your disciple boil it for you twice a day. I reckon that he will recover very quickly. When the time comes, I still need your help. This old man has so much talent, it would be a pity if he died. The old man on the bed listened with a blank face. Old son said a lot, but he became more and more confused. If you have something to say, just say it. Stop your storytelling. The old man's muddy eyes stared at old son and said. Old son patted his shoulder and said with a smile, Good thing, very good thing. The youth squatting outside the door used a wooden stick to tease the ants on the ground. There were not many ants in winter. Maybe it was because the weather was good today, but there were a few ants moving around under the eaves. The youth kept drawing circles with the wooden stick and watched the ants move back and forth in the circle. From time to time he would look back into the house. He didn't know what Grandpa, son and master were talking about. Every once in a while there would be a few sounds of laughter. Grandpa, son seemed to be very happy and Grandpa was also very happy. Why didn't little Yun come with Grandpa, son today? She even said that she would go to the mountains with him to set a trap to catch rabbits in a few days. As the young man thought about this, he raised his head and saw a young man who looked about the same age as him walking over with another figure. 80,000. Li Yi sat cross-legged on the warm brick bed and took a tile from the small table. He rubbed it with his thumb for a while, but he couldn't figure out what it was. He took a peek, shook his head and threw the tile in his hand out. Looking at the messy tiles in front of him, his expression was quite gloomy. Lady Luck obviously didn't favor him today. After teaching Rui and the others how to play mahjong, he didn't win even once after a few rounds. He lost 5 taels of silver. 70,000. Rui's expression was even more gloomy than Li Yi's. She lost 10 taels of silver. Rui smiled and played a tile. This thing called mahjong that her husband made was quite fun. She had already won 5 taels of silver. 9 circles. Xuanhuan's eyes were curved into crescent moons. Second Mrs. 10 taels of silver were all won by her. When it was Li Yi's turn to play, he clearly felt his thigh being pinched by someone. He looked down and saw that Mississippi Lu was making a gesture to him. She stretched out 2 fingers on one hand and made a circle with her index finger and thumb on the other. This was what 2 circles meant. Li Yi glanced at her. Playing mahjong was all about fairness and she actually wanted to cheat. However, when he thought about it, if Mississippi Lu continued to lose, someone might suffer. For the sake of family harmony and world peace, he had no choice but to disassemble his tile and play at 2 circles. Rui couldn't wait to pick up Li Yi's tile. She was very satisfied with his tactfulness. With this 2 circles she could listen to the tiles. His little trick just now might not be able to fool her sister, but it was not a problem to trick Xuanhuan. The little maid was too lucky today. He had to suppress her arrogance first. Get rich. He casually played a tile. Whoosh. Xuanhuan stretched out her white and tender little hand and pushed down her tile wall. Her dimples were revealed as she smiled. 13 circles. Young master, miss, I won again. Chapter 264. Recently, Li Yi and Lu Rui had become closer because they had never won a game of mahjong with only the 2 of them in the house. Mahjong was originally created to relieve their boredom, but the more they played, the more depressed they became. It was not a big deal to lose money, but they had to regain their dignity. Mississippi Lu was more competitive than him, and she would not allow herself to lose to others in any aspect. So recently the game at home had not stopped. Then the 2 of them lost more and more. Li Yi finally understood what was going on in a gambler's mind. It was no wonder that so many people had lost everything because of gambling since ancient times. This was a road of no return. He thought he had the home advantage. Rui and the others had just started playing mahjong, and it would take them a long time to familiarize themselves with the game. However, the goddess of fortune only cared about Xuanhuan and Rui. He and Mississippi Lu had never received the goddess's blessing. It was indeed a must-kill weapon for middle-aged and elderly women. Within 2 days, a second set of mahjong appeared in the house. After dinner, the women who were idle at home played mahjong for the whole afternoon. Old Fong and the others were busy renovating the stoves for each family. After Mrs. Fong came to the kitchen to take a look, she no longer mentioned the matter of Old Fong smashing the stoves. She played mahjong with a few other women and estimated that they would be able to have dinner the next day. After cooking, the kong was warm and comfortable. This glutton finally did something reliable. When Li Yi came back from outside, he saw a few women in front of the house from afar. The sounds of eating and banging were incessant. 2 elderly women shook their heads and sighed at the degeneration of morals in the world. How did the originally diligent wives suddenly become lazy women? The children waved their arms and cried out that they were hungry, but the mothers only cared about grabbing the wooden blocks. When the children cried out that they were hungry, the mothers threw a few copper coins to the children to buy food. In the past, such women would have been driven back to their parents' homes. Living in this world was not just for food and clothing, but also for entertainment. The emergence of mahjong had undoubtedly opened the door to a new world for the women in the stronghold. They had found spiritual sustenance. As for whether or not they would become addicted to it, they did not have to worry too much. It was just for the novelty of playing mahjong for a few days. After the novelty wore off, mahjong could only be reduced to an ornament in daily life. People who were used to living a hard life would not be idle all the time. For example, Old Man Sun had become busier and busier recently. Li Yi had just returned from the brothel. While Old Man Sun was not around, he and Ruoqing spent a long time talking about recruiting performers and expanding their business. A medium-sized brothel had been rebuilt outside the city. According to Li Yi, it was more appropriate to call it a theater. Building such a thing was different from building a house. It was the same as building a shack. The place that had been built in a few days was sturdy, far better than other crudely built brothels. It would definitely not collapse under the weight of heavy snow again. As for actors, since this model was still in the experimental stage, they had only recruited 20 of them for the time being. Li Yi and Ruoqing had discussed it and decided that a medium-sized theater should have 20 actors. It would not only satisfy the performance requirements, but it would also be easier to manage. Living at the bottom of society, it was common for them to not have enough to eat. No one could refuse a fixed monthly salary of 500 copper coins. At first, those performers thought that Oldman's son was lying to them. After a short moment of shock, they seemed to be afraid that Oldman's son would change his mind, so they immediately pressed their fingerprints on the contract. In addition to the salary, the content of the contract also required them not to spread what they learned here. Everyone understood this. For people like them, this was something to eat. If others learned it, they would be the ones starving to death. No one dared to violate the contract. Even if this was brought to the government, it would count. It was definitely a place that they could not afford to offend. Stage plays were still very unfamiliar to those newly recruited performers. After listening to Li Yi's suggestion, Oldman's son and the others pondered for a long time before they came up with it. These people had no experience, so they still needed to go through some training before they could officially take up the job. Although the painted skin was still popular, it was obviously not as popular as before. The next one to be put on the big stage would be a Chinese ghost story. Unlike the former, which relied on horror to attract people, stories like romance and the female ghost scholar would probably be more attractive to men in this era. This was especially true for scholars. Every single one of them had fantasized about various romantic affairs, such as spending the spring night with a fox immortal or a beautiful female ghost. 80% of the supernatural novels on the market had such a plot, and it was still the mainstream of the market. It was a group of ancient losers who liked to fantasize. If their fantasies were fulfilled, they would not be afraid of not generously, "Oh right, I still have to find time to copy a few more stories. Why don't I take out the complete Liao Zhai novel and make it into a series?" Li Yi lay comfortably in the huge bathtub. Actually, the ancient people also knew how to enjoy themselves. If the bathtub was covered with a lid, could it be called a sauna? In the middle of winter, there was nothing more comfortable than soaking in a warm room with a hot bath. If there was, then there would be a pair of soft hands constantly massaging your shoulders while you were soaking in the bath. The tiredness of the day would be dispelled. Xuanhuan's massage skills were becoming more and more skillful. Li Yi secretly condemned this kind of luxurious and decadent life in his heart. He was incomparably disgusted with feudal hedonism. He opened his eyes and glanced at the door through the mist. Xuanhuan had gone out to get hot water. Why wasn't she back yet? Creak. The door was pushed open and he could vaguely see a figure carrying a bucket of water in. Li Yi closed his eyes in satisfaction. Footsteps came from behind him. Warm water was poured into the bathtub. Just as the servant girl was about to leave, Li Yi called out to her without opening his eyes. "Wait a moment, help massage the young master's shoulders again." The footsteps paused, and a moment later, a pair of soft hands were placed on his shoulders. He felt that Xuanhuan's skills this time had improved quite a bit. He remembered that when he was shopping previously, the servant girl stared at a bracelet in golden jade lane for a long time. He would buy it for her tomorrow. As he massaged, Li Yi began to feel strange. No matter how fast the servant girl's skills in massaging the shoulders improved, it was impossible for her to reach Rui's level in less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, the familiar chatter by his ear was gone, and there was no longer any pleading for him to continue telling her the story that she had not finished. Just when he was about to turn his head to take a look, a familiar voice sounded. "Husband, the water seems to be a little cold. Do you want to add some hot water?" This was Rui's voice. Chapter 265. Ordering Ru Yi around was not as easy as ordering Xuanhuan around. He did not add more hot water, nor did he let Rui continue to massage his shoulders. After she went out, he came out of the bathtub, dried his body, lay on the bed with his arms as a pillow, and stared at the ceiling in a daze. Before going to bed, he would habitually think about some things. Even the memory fragments hidden in the depths of his mind in his previous life were found in a corner, carefully savoring and never tired of it. One by one, the happy, sad, or angry things were like fleeting clouds. Although it had only been a few months, it seemed to have crossed thousands of years. Those things, whether happy or sad, did not cause much ripples in his heart. He just tried his best not to think of those familiar faces. Every time this happened, an emotion called yearning would spread like crazy. Those people or things he was destined to be unable to give up in this life. If there was a chance to go back, no matter how difficult it was, he would not have any hesitation, even if it was just a glance and then look at that familiar world. Pa! A crisp sound rang in the room, but Li Yi, who was in a state of absent-mindedness, did not notice it. Today was the 15th and the moon outside was very round. This day of every month was the most difficult time for Li Yi, especially when he was alone. There was no sound around, and a feeling of loneliness escaped from the depths of his soul. However, even in a state of absent-mindedness, the feeling of dizziness could still be felt, and the strength in his body was gradually draining away. The feeling of nausea also gradually became clearer. Naturally, it was impossible for him to feel dizzy and nauseous because of homesickness. When he realized that the situation was not quite right, he immediately recovered his mind and sat up from the bed. At this time the room was filled with a strange smell. Li was very familiar with this smell, the smell of coal smoke that he often smelled when he was a child. Not knowing when the chimney made of bamboo on the honeycomb briquette stove actually cracked. The symptoms that he felt just now were obviously mild carbon monoxide poisoning. The chimney made of bamboo couldn't completely expel the smoke, so people who had a stove would usually choose to extinguish the stove at night. After taking a bath just now, he forgot to do so. Fortunately, he didn't fall asleep. Otherwise, Rui and the others would have to wait to collect his corpse tomorrow morning. With a lingering fear in his heart, he moved the stove outside and opened the door and windows to the fullest. He sat alone on the porch and looked at the moon. She did not know when the carbon monoxide in the room would run out. The moon tonight was big and round. It was said that the moon on the 15th of the lunar month was round on the 16th of the lunar month, but the round in the word circumference was not the round in the word reunion. Wearing an unlined garment, it was quite cold sitting on the porch. However, Li did not want to move now, so he did not go back to the room to get his clothes. He just leaned against a pillar and looked up at the sky. He did not know whether the moon in the two worlds was the same, at least on the surface. There was no difference. There was a large dark spot alternating between light and dark. Now, the common saying was that the moonlight was blocked by the osmanthus tree in the moon palace, and almost everyone thought so. Every time this happened, he would involuntarily have a feeling of loneliness as a master. A group of ignorant people. It was just a plane on the moon. There was no osmanthus tree. Last time, when Li Xian was drunk, he said he wanted to go to the moon to see Chang'e. With the current conditions, he could not think about going to the moon, which was even more difficult than reaching the sky. A figure had been leaning against the door for a long time, watching Li Yi's expression alternating between joy and sadness. His eyes had never left the moon in the sky, and he was holding a garment in his hand, but he never walked over. Achoo! He sneezed and almost snot came out of his nose. When he was about to get up and go to the room to get his clothes, he felt a weight on his shoulder, and a coat immediately appeared on his body. "Husband, are you admiring the moon alone?" Lu Rui sat down beside Li Yi, also staring at the moon in the sky. "I'm thinking, when can I go to the moon to have a look?" Li Yi seemed to murmur unconsciously. "Ah." There was a little surprise in Rui's voice. She looked back at him, blinking her eyes. She had always been steady, but at this moment she actually looked like a little girl. She reached out and touched Li Yi's forehead. After finding that he did not have a fever, she became even more confused. The Moon Palace was the place where immortals lived. How could mortals go up there? Since ancient times, countless people had thought about it, but no one had done it. Although the moon always hung there quietly, there was no door. Only immortals could go up there. Don't be surprised. In theory, this is very feasible. Li Yi took her hand away from his forehead and found that it was very cold. He held it with both hands and said, "Maybe thousands of years later, someone will really do it. However, if an ordinary person goes up there, they will definitely die. It's hot in the day and cold at night. There are holes made by big stones everywhere. It's not a place for people to stay at all. If they don't die from the cold or the heat, it will be fun. If they don't die from the cold or heat, then it'll be fun. Everyone there is an expert in qigong. With a leap, they can cover at least a distance of several feet. Their strength is also extremely great. An ordinary person can lift the stone lion at the entrance with just a little effort." Lu Rui let Li Yi hold her hand and transfer his warmth to her. She listened to him talk about these incredible things and would occasionally ask a few questions. He was always so knowledgeable. He knew a lot of things that she had never heard before. In the past, she thought that people who were educated were all so amazing. Later, she gradually realized that her husband was different from those scholars. No scholar could tell so many wonderful stories, and no scholar knew so many ways to earn money. Furthermore, no scholar knew that Chang'e was not on the moon. Her husband even knew how far the moon was from here. If there was a road that could go straight to the moon, an ordinary person would have to walk for 10 years to get there. If it was someone else, they would definitely think that the person who said these things was crazy. However, she knew that her husband never lied about these things. Achoo! He couldn't continue gossiping about the moon with Rui. Li Yi had already sneezed a few times. It was winter and it was still cold to sit outside with clothes on. His butt was almost frozen to the point of losing consciousness when he sat on the cold ground. Seeing Li Yi stand up, Lu Rui walked into his room and quickly came out. She shook her head and said, "I can't go in yet. The carbon poison has not dissipated completely." When she went to Li Yi's room to get his clothes, she already felt that something was wrong. Seeing him put the stove outside, how could she not know what had happened? "Forget it. I'll sleep in the kitchen tonight. It was really too cold." Li Yi really missed the hot Kong bed. Lu Rui shook her head and said, "Xuanhuan is afraid of the cold. I've already let her sleep in the kitchen. I'm afraid she's already asleep." Li Yi wrapped his clothes around his body. Originally he had one room, Rui had another, and Xuanhuan usually slept with Rui. Now that he couldn't sleep in his room at night, and Xuanhuan had taken over the warm Kong bed in the kitchen, did he have to sleep outside tonight? "Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight?" Hearing Rui's voice, Li Yi's expression froze. Chapter 266. Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight? Hearing Rui's words, Li Yi's first thought was that it was her trick again. Last time, she closed the door and asked him to take off his clothes, but he didn't expect it to be for healing. This time it must not be what he thought at first. Although he had the soul of thousands of years later and was much more open-minded than the ancient people, in fact he was still very thin-skinned on some things. After all, he was just a young man without any experience in love in his previous life. It was too difficult to expect him to be an expert in flirting with girls, especially beautiful girls in ancient times. He walked into Rui's room generously. He would sleep here for the night. Rui, Xuanhuan, or Rui could make do for one night. In the future he would have to put out the stove early at night and Fang would have to warn him. Carbon monoxide poisoning was almost incurable in ancient times. Even if he could be cured after a long time, there would be serious sequelae. He would either be paralyzed or stupid, and he needed to be vigilant at all times. There was a faint fragrance on the sheets and quilt, which Li Yi would never forget in his life. When he first came to Willow Leaf Village, he woke up in this fragrance. It was not perfume but the natural body fragrance of a woman. Rui carried a quilt from the next room and closed the door. Under Li Yi's puzzled gaze she walked to the bed and said, "Husband, can you move a little deeper?" Carbon monoxide poisoning and Fang were all forgotten by Li Yi at the moment. If she liked to inhale, she could inhale. She had a good body, so inhaling some carbon monoxide was nothing. Hugging the quilt with a faint fragrance, he shrank to the foot of the bed. Watching Rui crawling into the quilt and lying next to him, Li Yi was still in a daze. It turned out that he was right this time. Xuanhuan and Rui are asleep and I don't want to disturb them. She turned to look at Li Yi and explained, "It's getting late. Husband, you should rest early." If Li Yi had not fallen into a state of shock, he would have been able to hear the slight tremble in her voice. Unfortunately, he was still unable to get over the soft flesh on his arm. He pinched it hard and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The pain meant that he wasn't dreaming, nor was it a hallucination caused by inhaling too much carbon monoxide. In the middle of the room, the flame of the oil lamp on the table was still flickering. Rui flicked her finger and a strong wind swept across, plunging the room into darkness. Although he was only covered with a blanket, Li did not feel cold at all. Instead, his body felt warm from the inside out. His nose was filled with a familiar fragrance. He had always been used to sleeping alone. Now that there was another person by his side, the sleepiness that had just arisen was instantly gone. However, none of this was important. His heartbeat quickened and his mind was filled with all kinds of guesses. What did she mean? Was it what he thought? If he pounced on her now, would he be beaten to death by her? The good tacit understanding between the two was finally broken tonight. Li Yi, who was almost an idiot when it came to relationships, couldn't guess what she was thinking. There was a fierce battle in his heart. Should he be a beast or worse than a beast? This was a question worth thinking about. Li Yi felt that he was starting to be like a philosopher again. In the darkness, where Li Yi couldn't see, Lu Rui's pretty face blushed from her neck to her ears. She could hear that Li Yi's heartbeat was much faster than before. In fact, as a martial arts master, she couldn't control her heartbeat at this moment. It wasn't easy to make this decision. She pondered for a long time before she plucked up the courage to say it. Husband and wife, they had to sleep together eventually. Although they weren't used to it now, there would be a day when they would get used to it. Aunt Fang had already asked several times why there was no movement in her stomach after being married for almost half a year. She asked if she should find a doctor to take a look. She was already so old that her child could run around. Listening to Aunt Fang's private words with a red face, she still blushed when she thought about it. When she thought about those things she would do with her husband in the future, she could no longer maintain her calm state of mind. Although she was very skilled in martial arts, she was still a woman from an ordinary family. She had practiced martial arts hard since she was young. It was only because after she became stronger that no one could bully the two of them. Now she didn't have to worry about being bullied. She had also reached a level that others couldn't reach in their lifetime in martial arts. Instead, she liked such a peaceful life. In her heart, she also hoped to be able to live like a normal husband and wife as soon as possible. The prerequisite was to break the silent tacit understanding between the two of them. No matter what, someone had to take the first step. If that person wasn't her husband, then it could only be herself. She stretched her hands out of the quilt and folded them in front of her chest. Her eyes were wide open. She felt an extra breath beside her. It was already very late at night, but she still didn't feel sleepy at all. When a hand reached out from the side, her heart couldn't help but start to beat wildly. She almost ran away, but in the end that hand only held her hand and didn't move further. Even Li Yi could feel that Rui's breathing had become hurried, which meant that her heart was not calm at this time. After feeling her mood, his heart calmed down. Sleep. Their fingers were tightly interlocked. Li Yi closed his eyes and quickly entered a dream. The breathing beside him quickly calmed down, and Lu Rui let out a long sigh of relief. She tilted her head slightly to take a look, and an imperceptible smile appeared on her pretty face. She slowly closed her eyes. Li Yi had another dream at night. This time there were no messy things in the dream. Naturally, he didn't have to wash his underwear secretly in the morning. In the dream he was in his home in the 21st century, sitting on the sofa and watching TV. Rui, who was wearing a white dress, was busy in the kitchen. The doorbell rang. Li got up and opened the door. When he opened the door, a long sword was on his neck. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who was dressed up and glaring at him. At the end of the dream, he was still being chased by Mississippi Lu with a sword. Li didn't understand why Rui always liked to run into his dream. This time the reason for the chase was that he kidnapped her sister. Early in the morning he got up from the bed. Although there was no one beside him, the fragrance was still there, which meant that everything last night was not a dream. Last night he had crossed a huge chasm. There was a relaxed smile on the corner of his mouth. The carbon poison was really too annoying. Li Yi felt that his previous room couldn't be used anymore. Coincidentally, there was not enough space in the storage room at home. From now on he would use it as a storage room. As for the original storage room, it was not bad to modify it into a study. Xuanhuan walked out of Li Yi's room with a copper basin in her hand. She looked puzzled. When she was about to ask Miss where the son-in-law went early in the morning, she walked to the door of Miss's room and looked inside. The copper basin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. Chapter 267. I'm sorry I won. Rui played a tile. Li smiled and pushed down his tile wall. Rui jumped off the heated bed in annoyance. She glared at the two and said, "You two are in cahoots. I'm not playing anymore." Ever since Rui became Li Yi's mistress, Li Yi's luck came back. He kept gesturing secretly and Rui always understood his meaning. Thus, Mississippi Lu became the only one who lost money in the family. Although winning money was not the main point in the end. At most, she used a few copper coins to deal with it. However, there were wins and losses in playing mahjong. It was not a good thing to always lose. Mississippi Lu was obviously angry. She was probably going to take her sword to the courtyard to chop the air. If there was a god of mahjong, Xuanhuan must be her biological daughter. It was just that recently she was obviously absent-minded. She was not focused when playing mahjong. No one knew what she was thinking. The next day, Li Yi changed his room into a storage room. The reason was that the room that had been ravaged by carbon poison could not be lived in. He began to live together with Xuanhuan with a peace of mind. Although he had to choose between being a beast and being worse than a beast, he had no choice but to choose the latter. But compared to the past, this was already a groundbreaking event. The reason why Xuanhuan was a little unhappy might be that she could no longer hug Rui to sleep. She had to sleep on the heated bed in the kitchen for a long time. But it did not matter. When spring came, he would build her another room. It was not a good idea for a girl to always sleep in the kitchen. Of course, the position that should have belonged to her was occupied by him. The little servant girl felt wronged first. He would slowly make it up to her later. He took Xuanhuan to buy the hairpin that she had liked for a long time. She would no longer have a depressed expression on her face. The two people walking in front were chatting. They were talking about the new play in the Chongping Street Theater. It was called A Chinese Ghost Story. The former brothel was no longer called a brothel. It was called a theater. Although most people were not used to it, the name was not the point. The point was that the plays performed in it were more novel and special. It was not comparable to any straw shed in the courtyard. He hoped that this A Chinese Ghost Story would be better than the previous Painted Skin. Of course, special places always had special rules. It was said that the theater was different from ordinary brothels. Not everyone could enter just because they wanted to. They had to buy a so-called ticket at the door. Although it was called a ticket, it was actually a small wooden plaque. On it was written the plays that could be watched with the wooden plaque, as well as the amount of time that could be spent inside. When they left, they had to return the wooden plaque. The tickets weren't expensive, only a few copper coins were enough. It wasn't even as much as the tips they threw out at once. Someone cursed inwardly. Those actors were crazy for money. Had they never seen a brothel that took the initiative to accept money? You want money, right? I won't look anymore, okay? Many people were very satisfied with this. They felt that the idea of the theater was really wonderful. The appearance of the tickets was to keep those who had no money outside. The last time they went to watch a play, there were actually beggars sitting next to them. They were dirty and smelly. There was only so much space in the theater. If they were late, there wouldn't even be a place to stand. Now it was better. Those who only wanted to join in the fun and were unwilling to pay for tips could not enter. They were happy to be at peace. They sat leisurely with a pot of tea and a stack of broad beans. After watching the plays they liked, they would leave. It was extremely comfortable. Of course, when a new play was released, they had to be more agile. Who would care about a few copper coins for the people who lived in the prefectural city? If they were late, they could only stand. Thank you, son-in-law. With a newly bought hairpin in her hair, Xuanhuan's eyes turned into crescent moons again. In one hand she held a tonghulu. It was a gift from Aunt Sue when she met her on the street. In the other hand she held onto Li Yi's arm. She took a bite and leaned over to give a bite to Li Yi. She took a bite. The tonghulu in the winter didn't melt so easily. The taste was improved. Those women had been trying to make more delicious tonghulu. Now they had developed several different styles. After eating the tonghulu, the young maidservant looked up at Li Yi and said expectantly, "Son-in-law, let's go to the theater to watch a play, okay?" Just now, she heard the two people in front of her talk about a Chinese ghost of Qiannu. The son-in-law had told her this story. After hearing so many ghost stories, she was no longer afraid. The last time the son-in-law brought her to see the Painted Skin stage play, she only screamed when the ferocious-looking female ghost came out. The son-in-law said that a Chinese ghost of Qiannu was not that scary, so the young maidservant felt that it was okay for her to go and take a look. He did not reject Xuanhuan's request. Today he had brought her out for a stroll. She grew up in the village and did not come into contact with many people. The young maidservant maintained her innocent and lively temperament very well. With her chattering by her side, any worries would be swept away. A small room was built at the entrance of the brothel. It was only big enough for one person. A dozen people lined up and passed by the small room. After placing a few copper coins inside, a wooden plate would be handed out from the inside. As one of the major shareholders of the theater, of course, Li Yi did not need to buy a ticket. He held Xuanhuan's hand and walked directly through the entrance. The people in the line originally wanted to question him, but when they saw the young man at the entrance politely salute the young man, they swallowed their words and obediently lined up to buy the ticket. After walking through the entrance, they faced the stage directly. The expanded stage was more than twice the size of the previous one. The seats below were also increased. There were separate stalls on both sides. Spending a few copper coins, one could buy a plate of broad beans and a pot of tea. There were 3 flavors of broad beans and one could choose freely. Of course, other than broad beans, there were also many pastries. When watching a play, eating some snacks and drinking a cup of tea would immediately improve one's taste by a lot compared to those who only knew how to shout. The price of the seats in the theater was not the same. The closer one was to the stage, the clearer one could see, and the higher the price. Therefore, most of the time there would be empty seats in the first row. Some people would feel that there was not much difference between the front and back. It was really not worth it to spend a few copper coins for a seat in the front. The curtain on the stage had not been opened yet. One could see many figures behind the curtain. They were probably still making preparations. People were still lining up to enter the theater. There were not many people in the seats. He pulled Xuanhuan to sit in the middle of the first row and waited patiently. He glanced at the wooden plate in the hands of the person beside him. On it were the words "Painted Skin," indicating that the next performance was still Painted Skin. Senior Pu Songling was indeed a master of his generation. There was a performance of Painted Skin here, indicating that this play was quite popular. He turned his head and looked around. He realized that from the previous brothel to the current theater, too much had changed in just a few days. Chapter 268. The theater worker banged a gong, indicating that the performance was about to begin. At this time the theater was almost full. In the past, there had only been a few square tables in the brothel for people to sit around casually. Now it had been changed to chairs connected together. A small platform protruded from one side of the chairs for tea and food. Of course, only the first 2 rows had this kind of treatment. They had to let those people know where the extra copper coins they spent went. Xuanhuan wanted to see a Chinese ghost story, but she didn't make it. She could only watch The Painted Skin again. Since she had nothing to do, she might as well wait with her. When the curtains were pulled back, a few more figures sat next to Xuanhuan. Li only glanced at them casually. He had just turned his head when he turned back. His expression was slightly dazed. Sitting next to Xuanhuan was a man about 40 years old. His appearance was not unfamiliar to Li. Professor Feng as Magistrate Dong's god-level lackey. Usually wherever he was, Magistrate Dong would appear unless something unexpected happened. Li looked over and saw the magistrate sitting next to him. He felt strange. Did the magistrate and the prefectural school professor have nothing to do all day? This was not a place high officials and nobles would come. One of them was in charge of the affairs of the prefecture, and the other was in charge of education. Logically speaking, they should be very busy. Why did they have the time to come here to watch a show? Clearly, Professor Feng also saw Li. After a pause, he turned his head and whispered a few words in Magistrate Dong's ear. Magistrate Dong had a deep impression of Li. His few poems had surpassed all the students in Qing and Fu. He had a close relationship with Crown Prince Ning and Princess Yongle. However, his personality was a bit strange. He was extremely talented but didn't want to be an official. It was said that he had been made a county officer by the emperor, but he almost never went to the county yamen. The strange thing was, the security of the prefectural city was better than before. In all honesty, Magistrate Dong admired Li very much. Especially that poem, wanting to speak but not wanting to speak, yet saying that the sky is cold in autumn, won him a deep liking. But he clearly had deep connections with the royal family. Although he wanted to promote him, it was not appropriate for him to do so. She had already forgotten about him, but she didn't expect to bump into him here today. Magistrate Dong shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. Today he just wanted to see the famous painted skin. He turned his head and said to another man in embroidered robes, "I'm curious what's so special about this painted skin that Brother Yen praised it so much." The man in embroidered clothes smiled and said, "I didn't expect that there would be no lack of capable people in this small brothel. Hidden in these short and strange stories is a profound truth. Under Brother Dong's rule, there are indeed many capable people. Before I left, His Majesty had already decided to implement the disciple rules in our Jing Kingdom as a book for children to learn. Brother Dong's contribution to the education of our Jing Kingdom cannot go unnoticed." Accepting the compliment of the man in embroidered clothes calmly, Magistrate Dong couldn't help but turn his head and look at the young man 2 seats away from him. Li didn't want to flirt with a man, not to mention the other was the magistrate, even if it was the emperor. He didn't even think about immediately going up to greet the magistrate. These important people like to go out incognito. If he put on an appearance of greeting a superior, the magistrate might even blame him for ruining his low profile. Wan Ruoqing ran the brothel very well. There was no other brothel in the city that was cleaner, tidier, and more orderly than this one. Every performance would be slightly improved. The performers relied on their acting skills, not their bodies. They were completely incomparable to those coquettish prostitutes outside. If this place couldn't keep customers, where else could? Inspired by himself, Oldman's son was ready to open a special martial arts show, but he was still in the stage of collecting information. After the incident with the wuxia swordplay, Oldman's son keenly discovered the business opportunity. In the brothel outside the city, such stories seemed to be more popular. Moreover, the martial arts people were generous and would never be short of money. Sometimes they would even throw large silver ingots on the stage. Oldman's son had to seize this opportunity. They gave him a good suggestion. He could collect some strange stories in the martial arts world and ask around. Using the information he collected, he could rank the martial arts masters and revise the rankings according to the latest information. He heard that there was a man named Officer Zhao in Chuzhou City. Although he had always been known for his loyalty, he was actually a rare martial arts master. It was said that he was about to step into the Grandmaster realm. Ordinary people didn't even know this secret. Li didn't pay attention to the performance on the stage. He was lost in his thoughts. If such a theater could be opened all over the Jing Kingdom, it would be a powerful force. Moreover, such a force would not easily attract the attention of others. If he could live such a peaceful life, he would consider it as contributing to the entertainment industry of this world. If there were always people who wanted to step on him, he was afraid that their feet would be pierced by nails. Stupid people, they think of ghosts as beauties. They don't listen to the words of loyalty. They are greedy for beauty. They don't know that a wife who has gone through hardships will gladly swallow the saliva of others. I don't know how many stupid people in the world don't know how to wake up. How sad. When thinking, the most annoying thing was to be interrupted, especially when the man in the brocade robe suddenly stood up and said these words with a laugh. To be able to see such emotions from watching a play, this fellow must have been educated before, and he must have been tormented by the path of sages. Even Li Yi was not satisfied, let alone the other people in the theater. Just when they were enjoying the show, someone suddenly stood up and shouted. Especially when the guy was sitting in the front row, everyone's view was blocked. What are you shouting for? Hurry up and sit down. They were all commoners. How could they know that the person sitting next to the man was the prefectural magistrate? They only knew that this guy had disturbed their interest in watching the show. Perhaps some people were frightened by his sudden shout, so they all spoke up in dissatisfaction. Magistrate Dong smiled bitterly. After so many years, his good friend still hadn't changed his bad habit. Thump. Among the noise there was a dull sound that was especially clear. A young man who looked like a scholar, who was sitting behind the man in the brocade robe, knelt in front of the man in the brocade robe. After bowing respectfully, he stood up and said, "Thank you for your teachings, sir. My poor wife who has gone through hardships with me for more than 10 years has suffered. Now, for the sake of a fox outside, I actually want to divorce her. How am I different from Wang Shen?" Sir's words just now were like thunder in my ears. They were deafening. I will remember them for the rest of my life and never dare to forget them. After the scholarly young man finished speaking, he once again bowed to the man in the brocade robe and strode away without looking back. Li Yi stared blankly at the young man's back as he walked away. He was very confused. Where did they find this actor? It's not too late to mend one's ways. The man in the brocade robe also watched the young man leave with a smile on his face. He stroked his beard, displaying the demeanor of an expert. "I'm talking to you, sit down." If it wasn't for a shoe flying from behind and accurately hitting his face, he might have been able to maintain the demeanor of an expert for a while longer. Chapter 269. Magistrate Dong was shocked to see a large shoe print appear on the face of his good friend from the capital. Official Yen. Professor Feng's little heart couldn't help but beat wildly. How dare they throw a shoe at an official from the capital? These unruly people were simply too lawless. How dare you? Who threw the shoe? A few people around the man in embroidered robes had already stood up and turned to glare at the crowd. What did he say? Is he in the right to disturb the show? Chase them out. The guards of the man in embroidered robes were angry, but the audience was even angrier. It was already kind of them not to be thrown out for making a racket in the theater, but they dared to yell at everyone. They couldn't even watch the show. Weren't the few copper coins spent in vain? In the next moment, the guards were drowned in shoes flying from behind. People had thrown out quite a few people like this who didn't know what was good for them. Every show there would be one or two unlucky ones. This had even become a tradition in the theater. The smelly shoes flew through the air. Magistrate Dong and the other two were also affected. Of course they couldn't stay here any longer. They ran outside pathetically and finally let out a sigh of relief. A group of unruly people, this is too much. Professor Feng's face was hit by the sole of a shoe. His face was red and he stomped his feet outside. The man in embroidered robes used his sleeve to wipe his face. He wasn't angry. He shook his head and said, "This is a quiet place to watch the show. It is our fault for making a racket and disturbing others. It is not wrong of us to be thrown out." He turned his head to look at Magistrate Dong and said with a smile, "Under Brother Dong's rule, the people are very tough." Compared to the sorry state of Professor Feng and the man in embroidered robes, Professor Dong looked much better. The shoe had not been thrown on him and his clothes were very clean. He patted his robes and said, "The one who made a racket was you. Of course it is not wrong of you to be thrown out. We are the ones who have suffered an undeserved disaster. No matter, no matter." The man in embroidered robes waved his hand and said, "My words just now have caused Brother Dong's students to repent. Brother Dong, shouldn't you treat me to a banquet to express your gratitude?" "Oh right, Professor Feng, where is the best restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture? With my meager salary, I can't afford to go to the Drunken Fragrance restaurant." Magistrate Dong smiled and said, There is a cup of green tea. It is a bit shabby, but it is enough to serve guests. I haven't seen you for a few years, but your stinginess hasn't changed at all, Dong Wenyan. The man in embroidered robes shook his head and sighed. When Li Yi walked out, Magistrate Dong and the others were still standing outside. Xuanhuan wanted to watch the next scene of a Chinese ghost story,